so how long does it take to get there?
Good morning, everyone.
Sorry, I just didn't want to go.
We're going to go. It's 9 a.m., and I call this meeting to order. Before we begin, I ask Casey on our staff to call the roll to establish a quorum.
Mr. Collins.
Here.
Mr. Darnell.
Here.
Mr. Eby.
Here.
Mr. Edwards.
Here.
Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. Kim. Here. Mr. Kraus. Mr. Morrow.
Here.
Madam Chairman, Hargrove.
Here.
You have 9 members present.
We have a quorum, and so we are duly convened. So I do want to start out by welcoming everyone who is joining us today. And I also want to welcome Commissioner Schwinn for being with us. And I want you all to also notice that Amy Owen is sitting in for Sarah Morrison, our Executive Director. She had her new baby boy a week from today, last Friday actually. And so Amy is sitting in. She is our Policy Director. I also want to begin by giving you all a recap of our day yesterday. We actually had a very productive day. We started out the day visiting a priority school, Wright Middle School here in Nashville. And that was a very enlightening experience for all of us, I think, because most of us, sometimes when we think about a priority school, we certainly question in our minds what's happening in those schools and what type of action are they taking to turn around the school. And so what we witnessed was a highly engaged principal who's full of passion and has a team who says they're on board and ready to do, and they are actually doing some great work there to turn that school around. So we spent about an hour and a half there. It was actually a student production of a particular song, I think it's The Circle of Life from The Lion King, and we heard a small orchestra perform as well as a mariachi band. So, you know, all in all, everything that we witnessed was certainly delightful to see, and we know that they're working hard to try to turn it around. In an hour and a half, it's hard to see everything, and so, but we did see very positive signs of what may be happening there to turn that school around. And after that, we left to have lunch with TOS, and we had an opportunity to spend some really quality time with the superintendents, the directors of schools. We definitely wanted to interact in a way that allowed us to gain feedback from them, and we had 3 questions that we wanted to discuss with them and get their input, and then hear anything that they wanted to share with us, because we talked about transparency and openness and communication, ensuring that everyone has access to us and that we're not some ivory tower state board sitting in someplace remotely where no one has access to us. So I think we had a great session. We got a lot of feedback. It was even difficult and challenging to cut off the conversation because we were gaining so much invaluable information. We're taking that information that we learned from those conversations, and actually Amy Owen is going to take the lead for us in gathering that data from each of the board members, because we were all taking copious notes to make sure that we were capturing everything that was being shared with us. So that was really a very important part of our day yesterday. And then we were in workshop yesterday afternoon, where we did receive a lot of updates. We certainly, it was important for us to receive an update on our own master plan and what progress our team is making toward achieving the items that are our key strategies within our master plan. We did hear an update from Tess Stovall and Ali Gaffey regarding our charter school work. And then we had a presentation from Lori Paisley with the TDOE on breakfast programs in Tennessee, and some really innovative ways that schools are dealing with students who are not getting the meals that they need, and especially early on the breakfast. And so there's some very exciting and innovative ways that they are addressing getting food to those students who may be stigmatized by free and reduced, and so it's just really enlightening to see what they're doing there. And then the commissioner was with us to spend a great deal of time sharing the strategic plan of the TDOE and the budget that goes along with it based on what was announced by the governor during his State of the State address. So it was a great day. We appreciate everything that happened that day. So now we're going to move into the agenda, and we're going to start out with item 1, which is the consent agenda. And I need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Mr. Eby, is there a second?
Second.
All those who are in favor will say aye, and those opposed will say nay.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is approved. Item 2, report items. We're starting out with recognition of the 2019 Blue Ribbon Schools. Miss Eve Carney.
Good morning. Sorry. Good morning. Again, I'm Eve Carney. I'm the Chief District and Schools Officer here at the Department of Education, and it is truly my honor to get to recognize and celebrate schools this morning with you. We have two categories of schools, starting with the Blue Ribbon schools. The National Blue Ribbon Program recognizes public and private schools, elementary, middle, and high, based on overall academic achievement, but also in their progress in closing achievement gaps among student groups. Every year, the U.S. Department of Education seeks out and celebrates schools across the nation to affirm the hard work of students, educators, families, and communities in creating safe and warm schools where students master challenging content. And the National Blue Ribbon School flag hanging at every school is a symbol that's widely recognized as a symbol of excellence. This year, the 6 public schools across Tennessee have been recognized as National Blue Ribbon Schools in 2019 and are among the state's highest performing schools in achievement as measured by TNReady. As we recognize the schools, we will ask that the staff and the leadership who are here with us today come to the front, and we will have a plaque as well as an opportunity for a photograph with the chairman of the state board, the commissioner, and your state board member. We will start with the first school, and that is Laughlin Design Center. It's from Davidson County here in Metro Nashville. Dr. Adrian Battle is the director of schools, and Christy Conyers Lewis is the school principal.
And Miss Kim.
I'm not sure if they're here yet. So it may be that we will come back if others come in. I know the weather could be an issue with some schools being able to attend today. The second school, the second Blue Ribbon school, is Campus School from Shelby County. Dr. Joris Ray is the director of schools, and Dr. Rebecca Scott is the principal of Campus School.
Mr. Collins.
We're going to get one in a minute, I'm very confident. The third school, Crockett Elementary in Williamson County. Jason Golden is the director of schools, and Bronwyn Rector is the school's principal.
Mr. Morrow. All right.
I feel good about this next one. I'm confident that they are here. McFadden, School of Excellence, Rutherford County Schools, Bill Spurlock, superintendent, and Dr. Clark Blair, principal. Thank you all for coming this morning. Come on up, and I will give you. Next, we celebrate Sequoia Elementary School from Knox County. Alicia Hinton is the principal, and Bob Thomas, the superintendent. Congratulations.
You should.
The sixth Blue Ribbon School is Maxine Smith STEAM Academy from Shelby County. We were informed that they were not able to be here today. Dr. Joris Ray is the Director of Schools, and Andy Dempster is the school principal. Just as a point, we will ensure that all schools who were not able to be here today receive their plaque, and we will capture a photograph to collect that. So we'll move on to the second category of schools, which is the National Title I Distinguished School. The National ESEA State Program Administrators have been recognizing examples of superior Title I schools since 1996. Each year, Tennessee selects 2 schools for recognition, one for excellence in serving special populations, and one for exceptional student performance. The schools recognized demonstrate a wide array of strengths, including team approaches to teaching and learning, focused professional development opportunities, individualized programs for student success, and strong partnerships with community, parents, and the school. These 2 schools in Tennessee have been recognized nationally, actually this week in Atlanta at the National Title I Conference. Today we have 2 schools, starting with Franklin Elementary School in the Franklin Special School District. Dr. David Snowden, Superintendent, and Ms. Ann Riley, School Principal. Thank you all so very much. Congratulations. And finally, we have Hollis Powell Elementary School from Dyer County. Dr. Larry Lusk, Director of Schools, Rena McKnight, School Principal.
Mr. Johnson.
Following today's board meeting, there will be a short reception to celebrate and meet these school leaders and district leaders personally. We are so proud to be able to take time today to recognize their achievements. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eve, and congratulations again to each of the schools. Outstanding results. Okay, moving on to the next items on the agenda, we have item 2C, Career and Technical Education Plan. Please state your name, too, for the record and your title.
Absolutely. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner Schwinn, board staff, and guests. My name is Steve Plale. I'm the Senior Director of College and Career Experiences for the Tennessee Department of Education. I also, in this role, have the privilege of serving as our State Director for the federal legislation which governs support and implementation of career and technical education, or CTE. And I'm very excited to share with you on our CTE plan item C here this morning. Before I get into specifics about the state plan, I want to just briefly explain a little bit about the federal legislation, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, otherwise known as Perkins 5. This legislation was signed into law by President Trump on July 31st of 2018 and reauthorized the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006. It provides nearly $1.3 billion in annual federal funding to support career and technical education for our nation's youth and adults. This legislation is somewhat unique in that it supports K-12 education, post-secondary education, and workforce development. At the national and state and local level, there are some consistent themes for this support. The first of which is that CTE is focused learning experiences which include the attainment of academic knowledge and the application of technical and employability skills. The second consistent theme in this legislation is that CTE is focused not just an alternative pathway for a subset of students, but high-quality CTE must be seen as a pathway and accessible for all learners, regardless of their perceived demographic differences, their backgrounds, or their zip code. And third, the third kind of consistency across this legislation for all three of those systems is that CTE is focused, or the learning experiences should focus on alignment and relevant learning experiences for both the student and the workforce. CTE programs must be aligned with economic and workforce needs, such that students can demonstrate their readiness for college career and opportunities in their community. Perkins 5, the federal legislation, also contains several new requirements or changes from the previous legislation. For example, in the new legislation, it requires extensive collaboration among state and local level secondary education, post-secondary education, and business and industry partners to develop and implement high-quality CTE programs. It introduces a new comprehensive local needs assessment, or CLNA, and this requirement is for local recipients to justify and align their CTE programs to regionally and locally identified high-wage, high-skill, and in-demand employment opportunities. It expands the reach and scope of career exploration and guidance into early and middle grades and strengthens the focus on CTE teacher and faculty pipelines. It promotes innovative practices to reshape where, how, and to whom CTE is delivered, and expands the list of special populations to be served by CTE programs. And finally, it shifts responsibility to the state to determine performance measures, including new program quality measures and strategies to meet these measures in a long-term 4-year state plan. Over the last 15 months plus, we at the department have worked extensively with state and local level secondary education, post-secondary education, and other state agencies responsible for workforce development, business, industry, and community partners to develop a bold vision for CTE in Tennessee and the 4-year state Perkins 5 plan. In nearly 150 in-person meetings which I have attended or helped host, have gathered input and comments from close to 1,000 different stakeholders, which helped to create this Strengthening Career and Technical Education in Tennessee plan. Ensuring cohesiveness across the department's strategic plan, Best for All, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission strategic plan, and TBR strategic plan was intentional, and it will be critical to our collective success. With that in mind, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education in Tennessee 4-year plan will braid these educational plans together, the vision to expand opportunities for all students to explore, choose, and follow a career pathway to success. Strengthening CTE in Tennessee also fully aligns with the Best for All strategic plan, and that we are successful in that if we are successful, then we will see a substantial increase in the number of students on track to meet their career goals 2 years after graduation, as measured by meeting 2-year and 4-year college persistence rates, TCAT certificate attainment, military enlistment, workforce preparation, or other similar paths. To achieve this vision, the plan will intentionally focus on 3 major priority areas. The first priority area is to provide more Tennessee learners with equitable access to comprehensive career exploration, advisement, and leadership and skill development through high-quality CTE pathways. This specific priority area will target innovative strategies at the middle school level or early grades level, 5th through 8th. The second priority area is to provide more Tennessee learners with opportunities to participate in high-quality and vertically aligned career pathways which prepares students to seamlessly transition into high-wage, high-skill, and in-demand occupations. And the third priority area, and I will steal this from the Commissioner in Best for All, is our moonshot. We're terming it that way, but it is to double the number of students who are participating in high-quality work-based learning experiences and attaining the relevant certifications, credentials, and/or degrees needed to meet the workforce demands of Tennessee. The Department and the Tennessee Board of Regents, who is the system responsible for the post-secondary CTE administration, will use multiple indicators of performance to measure success against these priorities, such as graduation rate, post-graduation placement, participation in work-based learning programs, practicum internships, apprenticeships, and at the secondary level, attainment of the Ready Graduate Indicator. The public comment period on the draft Strengthening Career and Technical Education in Tennessee 4-year plan closed late last week, and we will be making final revisions to the plan based on those comments and input from the public. This plan, in its final form, will be presented to the governor in early March for his review and signature before we submit to the U.S. Department of Education, and that deadline is April 15th. The plan and requirements of the legislation will take effect on July 1 of this year and will be in effect through June 30th of 2024. I believe the board members were provided the draft copy as it was released for public comment. I'm happy to discuss specific components of the plan and will pause to take any comments or questions at this time.
Steve, just for clarification too, and I may have missed it in the report, I know typically Perkins Reserve funding is associated with this type of plan. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious to know, do we have any indication from the government how much money would be applied toward making this happen across all districts in the state? Because I know I've had many conversations with districts who say they struggle to ramp up because of not enough counselors who are trained in work-based learning, because you have to have someone who's been trained to be able to offer those classes, those types of things, as well as other challenges that certainly exist. And I know there are some districts that are doing great work in this arena. So I'm just curious about the funding and what that looks like.
Absolutely. So did not go into specifics in this report, but absolutely the funding structure here with the new legislation does create the opportunity for a reserve that would, as we have structured in the past, that is a competitive opportunity for districts to apply for, and it will be aligned to supporting our 3 big priority areas of ensuring equitable access, aligning career pathways, and high-quality learning experiences through work-based learning. We do not have estimates from the U.S. government at this time on what our allocation will be for 2021. However, as President Trump mentioned in the State of the Union address earlier this week, he has funding tied to his budget for career and technical education specifically. So I anticipate this to only continue to grow in funding sources for districts.
Thank you for that. And then a clarification with the moonshot and doubling those numbers. What is the approach to being able to do that? So I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah.
Clear on that one.
Absolutely. So we know that work-based learning as an experience in career and technical education is vital for students. It's extremely beneficial and it can open the doors for a lot of students to make long-term career decisions. For me, when I participated in co-op years ago, I found out very quickly that I did not want to go into the healthcare field because I did not like the sight of blood. So that's a very powerful thing for students to be able to not only see what they want to do, but also see what they don't want to do. There are strategies in the plan that outline allowability, new allowability, flexibility for districts. They can pay for transportation with Perkins funds, for placement. We're also will revise and revamp our training for coordinators to ensure that more districts can provide that. And then also on-site or on-campus experiences, simulated experiences in the classroom to open more doors for students to participate in work-based learning.
I know part of the challenge is the employer equation. I don't know how much focus would come from perhaps someone like Ann Thompson and ECD who's focused on workforce, because it is really truly getting employers also to be a part of this equation for the career exploration side of it. Yes, you can do a lot of things internally within the schools, but that piece, I think that nut still has to be cracked, and there's lots of barriers to that. So I think with Ann and others in ECD, along with the department, I think there's a lot of work to be done there. That's what I do in my day job, and so that's why I'm intimately familiar with the challenges and struggles there. But a lot of great work is happening, and there are a lot of school districts that are already going back into the lower grade levels, and that's exactly where it needs to start. So
Absolutely.
Just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ann and I have worked closely. I've known Ann for years. I've worked very closely with ECD on this, the Department of Labor. I've had the pleasure over this during this time and development of representing the department on the Workforce Development Systems Steering Committee, which is tasked with creating a long-term vision for workforce development overall in Tennessee. So there's a lot of conversation happening around work-based learning and career and technical education just in general. Definitely think that there will be other funding streams, not just related to Perkins, which districts can access. You know, the pie is never big enough when it comes to funding, and we recognize that, but we're also looking for innovative ways to braid funding with the Department of Labor and their Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act funding to support work-based learning as well. So absolutely agree.
Great, thank you. Mr. Jensen?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Very enthusiastic about what you're doing and appreciate the report. If I were going to talk to the principal of high school in McNairy County next week, what would I say to him?
That's a great point. I definitely would encourage strong alignment with their regional needs there in McNairy County. So looking at, we know, and one of the great things about going through this process to develop this plan, we've been able to look at some of the data on where our citizens in Tennessee are working. So a vast majority of our, keep hitting this, I don't mean to, a vast majority of our state, they travel outside of their local community for work. We call them regionally transient when it comes to worker or employment. So would encourage them to look on a regional scale for alignment to ensure that the programs that they are offering are aligned to regional needs and employment opportunities. That is definitely something I would encourage them on or talk to them about. And then also the work-based learning component. It is so critical for our students to be exposed to the world of work and see what that looks like. Madam Chair, you mentioned earlier grades and some districts who are doing some amazing things in the early grades. I want to highlight Lawrence County and their work with the Work Ethics Junior program that they have there and have just started this school year, working with students in the 5th grade and middle grades as well on work ethics and skill development, and professional skills, employability skills that needs to start earlier with those students, and they're doing that already. So encourage them to think outside the box when it comes to career exploration and exposing them earlier to those job opportunities that are available there regionally.
I just want to add that I have witnessed with some very small rural counties, Clay County is an example, and they've pulled together a team of people who are working to address that very challenge. And it's amazing to me to hear that they're able to bring 40 or 50 employers from other areas of the region to their district just to be able to talk to their students and make sure that they're having that same exposure, because those employers want to hire those students just as much as they do the ones that are in the larger cities. Mm-hmm. A lot of people go to work in Putnam County as an example, and the directors that I've spoken to, they want to do all they can to prepare their students for the jobs that are closest to them, because they're realizing that they're not likely to attract the type of industry to their community because of logistics, a lot of other issues, access to highways, interstates, and so on and so forth. So they're pleased to prepare their students for what's nearest to them. So I think I just wanted to add that, Larry, because I know it's going to be an interesting conversation. So, yes, Ms. Kim.
Hi, thank you for reading us into that. So, question on the moonshot and the notion of doubling. What is the raw number that's represented in doubling?
I do not have that right in front of me, but it's just under 10,000. So it's just under 10,000 students annually participate in work-based learning experiences at the high school level. That's measured by course enrollment. And so we're looking to go from about that 10,000 mark to about 20,000.
So 20,000 is
Is the number that, just under 10, that I want to say it's 9,900 and something is our baseline. And
Got
then
it.
we're trying to get to just right at 20,000 students.
So a couple thoughts, and I worry. So first of all, conceptually, everything that you outlined is spiritually and wonderfully just fantastic. So I love what you presented to us. It is also true that there's an enormous amount of work represented in that. Essentially what you're looking to do is create a startup, because the idea of standing up this whole thing to try and get from 10,000 to 20,000 is just an incredible amount of coordination across state. So, and I know there's open questions around the budget and, right, like maybe there will be an army of people who enable us to stand this up successfully and realize all of our visions. But I should say, this goes back to some of the concerns I expressed last night in regards to the strategic plan, is that this, to my knowledge, is not even reflected in that. Like, this is a whole separate stream of work that we're proposing. And so, I had expressed some concern about, right, the fact that there right now essentially are about 20-ish, give or take a few, startups that we're proposing get launched as part of that strategic plan, and this is another one. And this is, I'm not saying we shouldn't do this. I just would like to, again, express my concern that we're just taking on all these things, some of which is like expressly embedded in the proposed plan, some of which, I don't know how many of these additional initiatives, each individual one, again, brilliant in concept, very difficult to operationally pull off collectively. And so I would just caution, again, us to then figure out if we're going to do this, then what else is going to give? Because, again, ambitious, wonderful, not entirely certain. In fact, I'm quite uncertain that we could pull all of it off at a high level. And so we just become self-dissipating, which is not ideal.
No. Just to respond to that, I appreciate your comments there. It's definitely something I think we're concerned about and realize that these are ambitious and lofty goals. But everything that we're discussing in the strengthening CTE plan is fully aligned to the Commissioner's Best for All plan. So when we're talking about career exploration as part of academics in that priority area under Best for All, this is part of that continuum of career exploration, that work-based learning component. Also, work-based learning is not new. Many of our districts already offer it on a limited scale. So the infrastructure is there. We've over the last 5 years or so been training work-based learning coordinators annually, multiple times annually, and have several hundred coordinators who are trained for work-based learning across the state. So absolutely we need to continue that training and ensure that we have teachers and coordinators who can support that work. But I want to stress that there is very strong alignment between this sub-plan or subset of the Best for All plan.
Understood. I just want to make clear, because any body of work we take on because the pillars of the strategic plan are so broad, everything we do fits under there.
Sure.
So I'm not trying to say it's not unaligned. It's just like, what are the bets are we taking to, in fact, make progress in academics, whole child, et cetera? And I do believe that, right, to double, again, noble goal, it's like to assume that we can do that without a pretty massive lift, I think is to misunderstand the nature of what it takes than to do it. And I'd rather not fool ourselves and the public about our vision and what we're trying to accomplish. And I prefer not to set goals that we have no hope of realizing. And I think step one is just understanding what are we trying to take on. It's, again, I'm not trying to pick on you, by the way. It's just like it's one of literally 25 potential startups. And I just don't see how we stand up all of those at a high level and best-in-class level. So this is maybe more Penny. I mean, I'm looking at you, but really.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I said yesterday. Part of the strategic plan, I think we probably just disagree that these are startups. Every single day, our districts are doing incredible work using materials. Now we're saying instead of using Teachers Pay Teachers or Pinterest or not having money to be able to purchase materials, now we are giving them materials to use. Every day, our teachers are in classrooms working their tails off to teach children how to read. We are saying instead of districts paying money to do professional development for literacy, we want to be able to provide that at a high level. So I think what the plan is, and some of the broadness, is it's the work that our districts are already doing. Frankly, PD, we are already providing. Resources, we are already providing. What we're saying is we want to do it better and at a higher level than the state has done before. But I don't think this is new work. This is doing the existing core work at a much higher level from the state in a coherent fashion. And I think the things that we're hearing today, again, there are things that our districts are doing, and a lot of them are doing it on their own, and they're trying to piece it together, and they're not resourced to do so. This is to say, let's take a coherent approach and say these kind of hodgepodge things that we're trying to fit together, how can we actually make it something that is sustainable and real and specific to each individual community? But I think the feedback we've received from districts has been pretty overwhelmingly positive about the plan, that it aligns and embeds in the work they're already doing, and it's resourcing it in a way that we haven't before.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Kim? Mr. Edwards?
So this is moonshot. If you're going to do something, it needs to be a moonshot, but you got to do it. In my mind, and we've talked about this over the years, and there's no objection to it, with being able to leverage K through 12 with TCATs and working toward dual credit or dual enrollment, and certainly leaving high school with a credential and hopefully a professional license. I have to think that being able to make those relationships much more robust would help in the workplace learning. The two of you all could get further down the road with employers than either one of you could alone. So is there a specific strategy to get all of the parties pulling in the same direction?
Yeah. So I think we definitely do that with our metrics and having just common metrics across what this looks like at a TCAT or at a community college, and then also at our high school level work, having consistent priorities and clear priorities that are aligned across definitely makes that possible. As far as a specific strategy, a lot of our districts, as the commissioner said just a moment ago, there are a lot of our districts and TCATs that are doing this individually. And so our role and our strategy here is to find those pockets of success and then figure out how we can scale them statewide. If there are things that we can do, I know that there are TCATs who are operating at the high school level or in a high school building, I should say, after school ends for K-12. I think that if we can figure out ways to just say, yes, that's allowable, you can do that, and support it with Perkins funds, I think that's even just a good step at kind of breaking down that barrier.
I think that therein lies the goal. And I think that when you're looking at taking two separate institutions and getting them to coexist operationally, it's tough. It's tough when you're talking about very, very old institutions that are used to traveling in their own direction, even though they do recognize their similarities in missions and stuff. Getting instruction provided in K through 12 by adjunct TCATs can absolutely put the wind to the overall program's back, but that's a hard thing to actually get folks to warm up to. And it seems to me that, I think everybody here and across Tennessee, certainly the employers and the people who are looking to get employed, want this thing more than anything to be as big a success as possible, which means as much as you need from anybody like a body like us to encourage that marriage as much operationally as we do just in agreement. You need to call on us, but, that needs to happen, I think.
One of the things I think we need to do is somebody needs to check with the TBR regarding this subject matter, because I do know that there are districts across this state that are actually doing that. They have strong partnerships, and even with the rural counties, they're transporting students to the TCAT, or the TCAT instructor is going to the high school. So that is happening, but is it happening uniformly across the state? So I think that's what we really need to know the answer to that, because we can talk about this ad nauseum, but at the end of the day, is it across the board happening? Are there just pockets across the east and the middle and the west and not uniformly happening? I think if you could get that information, Steve,
Yeah.
that would be helpful, because a lot of it is happening. I know it for a fact because it's happening in my district. So just for future reference, it would be great to know that.
Absolutely, and yes, it is happening in pockets across the state. I think we have to figure out a way to make that framework work for all of our TCATs in district areas. We do have strong relationships. Like I said, this plan is coherent across the Best for All strategic plan, and then also the THEC and TBR strategic plans. Work very closely with Executive Director Kraus, with THEC and their staff, and then also here with TBR, Chancellor Tidings, and I have discussed this plan specifically, and then also my counterpart here at TBR, Michael Tinsley. We've had many discussions about how we can ensure alignment to make sure that our pathway is seamless from K-12 into post-secondary.
The other thing, too, it will be interesting to see if the feedback that you've received, if there's any information, or if you even ask for a sizing of any challenges that may be existing within the framework. To Ms. Kim's point in doubling the moonshot, is that realistic, and what will it take on their end? Because I do hear of challenges related to the staffing and adding to staff to perhaps get there. And the funding to do that is another question. So I think sizing it and knowing exactly what we're dealing with. And will you back down that number if the evidence reveals that it's just not realistic to double?
Absolutely, and I won't share direct comments. We have just closed public comment. Like I said last week, we've been synthesizing that data and preparing our responses that will be included in the final plan when it's submitted to the governor's office. But have heard some comments about concerns, similar concerns about the manpower. Do we have enough teachers, enough coordinators to do this? And that's what started our kind of thinking on, well, we need to revise or look at how we are training coordinators, and then also what opportunities can we provide in school that are simulated work experiences. That is another piece of feedback that I've heard. I've conducted almost 20 in-person focus group meetings over the last month and a half, and most of them have been very excited about it, but they're also apprehensive about the workforce side. We can have this plan and ambitious goal, but getting workforce to the table, get employers to the table to actually see this through is somewhere where we're going to need some additional support from our friends at the Department of Labor, Economic and Community Development, Tennessee Chamber of Commerce, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eby?
Thank you. I'm the engineer on the board, so I'm looking at the table on page 60, and I think this is where you get your moonshot. If I look under the program quality participating work-based learning, it goes from a baseline level of 9.4% to the 18.8, which is a doubling. However, it says for 2020, it drops down to 8.5%, and you say that that's a reduction based on the way that Perkins does their modeling. I also noticed that there are several, that's just one of several goals on that chart, which includes 4-year graduation rate, academic proficiency in reading and language going from 37 to 45%. And it goes back to Ms. Kim's question with regard to, I'm all about challenging goals, but I think they ought to be realistic. But can you explain to me first the drop to 8.5%? So you're actually doing more than doubling. You're going from 8.5 to 18.8 according to this table.
Well, that is actually in response to just the understanding that with new definitions, there may be an initial dip. So that's accounting for that initial dip. But our baseline number is that is reflected at the 9.4. These metrics, what are here on this, are our state metrics that we have to report to the U.S. government on. But coming back to Madam Chairman, your point about potentially revising these goals if we get into this work over the next couple of years and we realize that maybe these were too lofty or what I'm hoping for is we're saying these are actually too low. We can go higher and above this. We do have that option in year 2 to revise the goals and targets as we move forward. But that is kind of an initial dip, and then also to respond to that. These metrics were initially released for public comment, 60-day public comment in the summer, and the responses that we received on that period was very positive, and feeling that these were attainable. Yes, that they will be challenging, but definitely attainable given the amount of infrastructure and the amount of work that has already been done and groundwork that has been laid to support these goals moving forward. Most of these are similar to what we had under Perkins 4. So if you look at graduation rate under Perkins 4, our graduation rate statewide was for CTE concentrators was over 97% of our CTE concentrators graduated on time. So keeping in line with some of those goals here and the metrics that we had previously, that's just one example. But the academic proficiency in math, academic proficiency in reading language arts, those are all continuations of Perkins 4 metrics that we will be using. So we do have some historical data to say this is where we have been operating at on those pieces, and then that helps to justify not only the dip, but then where we want to be over 4 years.
Okay. And then secondly, if I look on page, I think it's 62, the acknowledgements, quite a list of people who have provided input and worked in Tennessee Board of Regents. I don't see the State Board of Education. And I guess the question I'm asking is, first, why are we not involved up front early on? But secondly, more importantly, wouldn't it be powerful for us to endorse this? And I'm asking the chairman, is this something that, maybe we ought to make a motion and endorse this plan, because I do think it is important. And would that help you if we could say that the State Board of Education endorses this plan?
Absolutely, and that is an oversight on our part, not including the State Board of Education in this list. That is definitely an oversight. We have had multiple conversations with board staff regarding this work. Madam Chair, I know that you were involved at one of our forums that we hosted about 9 months ago now with SCORE. So definitely would appreciate the endorsement from this body, but also will definitely include this body, reference this body here in these acknowledgements.
Could, Madam Chair or Mr. Parliamentarian, is that something that we can take a motion in our action items that says that we endorse the support for the plan for the CTE?
Mr. Vice Chairman, the body could take such an action if they felt satisfied that they had the detail that all the members were comfortable with. Of course, anyone could make
I think we
such a
should have discussion if the rest of the members believe that that's an action that we should take. I certainly would entertain I want your opinions. Do you think that that's necessary, important, Mr. Edwards?
I certainly do. I think that it is something that, especially Madam Chair, you and I, the world we come from is, but if we're going to endorse it, I think that we really do need to get more into it. I've got some thoughts about how we identify where the shortages are and I'll give you just an example. You can canvass a region or an area, and the alphas will get their jobs in there. But if you look at what either the Department of Labor or a lot of these employment, like Burning Glass and some of these, you'll find where the openings are and how long they've been open, and which means that's how long people. That really tells us what programs need to be brought out there and provided for as long as they need, because some of these will come and go. Some will be forever and a day, but I think we need to endorse it. I'd like to have a little more
Problem is,
discussion time.
what's your schedule? When does this get submitted?
You mentioned a couple of dates. You mentioned April the 15th as
Yeah.
one.
So this plan will be submitted to the governor's office in early March for his review and signature, and then it has to be submitted to the U.S. Department of Education by April 15th.
So we've got 3 weeks, basically. It goes to the governor in early March. So
Yes, Mr.
Well,
Edwards.
At this moment, at this time, we're not hearing others' arguments.
Yeah.
I certainly would endorse it in theory, in concept.
And I'm not saying.
I don't think I could do it and endorse.
Sure. And I'm not saying that we do it now. I'm just saying we got, this is, if we're going to do this, it's something that we need to get people working on. Unfortunately, again, it's brought to us at this point in time, and maybe we have been involved in that, I don't know. But,
It's been a while.
but we've got 3 weeks. I mean, we need to meet the schedule for Perkins. We can't, I guess we can put the governor off, but we got to meet the schedule for Perkins. So whatever we do, and I agree, we shouldn't do it if we don't feel comfortable with it. Endorsing it in theory might be something that we do, but if we're going to endorse it, we need to put together somebody to look at it.
If we wanted to do that, and if you're not satisfied, you're happy in theory, and I certainly am too, I think it would require a special called meeting for further discussion to ensure that you all are comfortable doing that. And so until I hear that you are fully comfortable doing it now, because I don't know, you're not going to say in theory, you're not going to write in theory on a report. You either endorse it, or you don't, yes.
Madam Chair, we can certainly work to schedule a called meeting if that's what the members would like. I'm wondering if there may also be an option for some kind of letter of support that board members may sign if they're interested after having a greater period to review, if a meeting is not feasible.
We could certainly do that, but I would like to hear from other members. Yes,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Jensen.
I'm on page 62 with this list, and reading that language, it suggests that the people that are signed on here have provided valuable feedback, and they're not really, I don't think, technically endorsing it. So
I understand that, but I do believe that if we really feel important, that this is important for the state, I think it would help them if we did endorse it.
Okay.
So that's the reason I brought up the endorsement.
I
I
just
think we ought to provide feedback, but I think if we feel committed that this is something we think the state ought to do, I think it would help that the State Board of Education would endorse it.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Darnell.
I would be hesitant before I really speak to our district CTE directors, because they're the ones who are going to be able to give the best feedback. They're on the ground, they know what their needs are. And so I think if we could have a special called meeting, give time for the members to reach out to their CTE directors and their district directors, and really dig, and give us more time, I think that would probably be the best option, in my opinion.
Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Ferguson.
I would agree with Nick. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of great work being done in this area. The document that we have here may very well address just about everything we need it to, but I think it's important enough for us to study a little bit more and have a called meeting.
I think it really depends if we can get a called meeting here in the next week or so, because we need to provide time to give the feedback back to Steve so that if any changes should be suggested and recommended, that you have time to do that before it goes to the governor. So that's what we have to have happen, and I don't know that we can make that, just have that decision now.
We can look and follow up.
Okay.
Madam
So,
Chair,
yes,
if I may,
please do.
just to respond to two comments regarding the CTE directors. CTE directors have been very, very involved in the creation of this plan from the beginning. So when, right after the legislation was signed into law, we began monthly regional stakeholder sessions and stakeholder feedback groups with CTE directors specifically, as they are the practitioners who will be implementing most of this work. So they have been very instrumental in shaping what this plan is and what it looks like. So I just want to make that comment. But also, I'm at the will of the board here. So if there's anything else that I can provide, or in a special called meeting, or whatever you need, I'm happy to support.
Steve, thank you for that. I think the input from the CTE directors is certainly critical. I think hearing from the directors of schools is also very important, because they know more about the financial side of it and their head count and all that, whereas CTE supervisors, because sometimes they're not directors, may not have access to all of that pertinent information. So I think what we could do is attempt to see if we have time to do a special call meeting if all of the members, or at least the majority, are available. If that does not work, then we do have the option of a letter, which would give you some time still to speak with people in your area, in your region. So I think we have two options. So as to, we don't want to delay. Obviously, we shouldn't, we can't, but we'll have to take action quickly on our part. So that's up to us. And if we cannot give you that feedback in a timely manner, clearly you have to go forward without our endorsement. That's my opinion.
I will say this last comment here. Would appreciate the board's support and endorsement. However, this plan is a plan. The next 4 years of implementation is really where the work is going to be. So even if the board is not able to come together, or feel that it be appropriate to endorse the plan itself prior to submission, would definitely continue and want to continue this conversation as we go through implementation, because that's really where the work is going to be happening.
Thank you. Any other comments, Mr. Morrow?
I want to say first, thank you. I'm very for equitable access, aligned career pathways, high quality learning experiences, and I think if looking at that list, you've done a great job of bringing in a lot of stakeholders that have a lot of perspectives on this. And I kind of look at it in two ways. I mean, there's the plan, and then there's the implementation of the plan. And you know, I'd love to dig into a little bit more. Obviously, I think the feedback from superintendents is going to be great. And I don't, while I don't want you or the commissioner or anybody who's done all the hard work to think this is somehow a distrust or not a belief in the great amount of work. It's just, you know, wanting to be thoughtful and mindful and helpful. If there is something in there that we could offer in helping this not just be a plan, but actually be implemented, we want to be a part of that. At least I'll speak for myself. I want to be a part of that. And so while it would be hard to do that today, other than make it a perfunctory exercise, which I think is disrespectful to the work that did go into it, I would be for us spending a little bit of time digging into that, talking to some supers. That way, our word in support of or not is thoughtful and meaningful, because just the exercise of us saying great, I think that takes away from the amount of thoughtfulness that has gone into the plan. And I personally, I love the idea of let's get after this. Like I've heard Mr. Edwards say a lot, like it's real time. There's kids in classes today, and so I don't want any of our hesitations to trip up any of the great work that's going down. And then the other thing I would just love to have in the meantime, as we're looking at this, is who's doing it the best, right? Like who in the state is doing this at, as Ms. Kim said, best in class, and how are we drawing from those places? You know, understand that everybody has different contexts, but is there a framework there that we can do that with? So absolutely. I just want to say thank you for the amount of work, and don't take, at least from my perspective, don't take the questioning, the good discussion we're having as any way a not having faith in, or I'm just learning myself. And so this has been great, and I look forward to digging into it.
Thank you very much for your support there. And no, absolutely, do not take any of this personally. I will be very upfront about this. I'm not the smartest person when it comes to career and technical education. I have a lot of experience there, but there's a lot of other perspectives and insight that can help to make our plan stronger and our work stronger. So welcome feedback and constructive work to make this plan stronger.
And I want to echo Mr. Morrow's comments because this discussion was meaningful and very important, and nothing we've said should it be implied, as he stated, anything against it. I'm excited about it because, this, as I said earlier, it's what I do in my day job. Mr. Edwards has mentioned it. I know there are other members of the board who feel the same way. This is great work, and it is the right approach. And so, as you know, we want to dig deeper. So thank you so much. Excellent presentation.
Yeah.
We look forward to interacting with you in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Board.
We're going to move into items on first reading. That's item 3. And the first item is A, Charter School Governing Board Training Policy. A reminder for every presenter to state their name and their title for the record.
Good morning. My name is Allie Gaffey. I'm the Deputy Director of Charter Schools for the State Board, and I'm presenting your first 3 items on first reading this morning, beginning with the Charter School Governing Body Training Policy 6.112. So a little background first. Public Chapter 219 of the 111th General Assembly amended the language involving the annual training requirement for charter school governing boards. And the new statutory language states that any training course used by the charter school governing body to meet the annual training requirement must be certified by the Tennessee Charter School Center and approved by the state board. So policy 6.112 is a companion policy to our state board rule 0520-14-01-007, which is on final reading today. And this policy will contain the list of certified and approved training courses for charter school governing bodies to use for their annual training requirement. And so currently the state board is working with the Charter School Center to approve the certified courses for the 2020-2021 school year. And a complete list of the courses will be added to this policy on final reading. Our staff recommends acceptance of this item on first reading and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Edwards, second, Mr. Cobbins. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Next item.
The second item I'm presenting on first reading is our Charter Schools Rule 0520-14-01. Public Chapter 219 of the 111th General Assembly amended the charter school application timeline, requiring sponsors to submit a charter school application to the Department of Education and their appropriate local Board of Education by February 1st of each year. So this item proposes updates to our state board rule approval of a charter school to reflect this new statutory deadline. Additionally, this item updates terms and citations in Section .01, approval of the charter school, Section .03, allocation of state and local funds, and Section .04, enrollment, to align with the language of Public Chapter 219. So between first and final readings, it's likely that we'll also reorganize the order of this rule to clearly differentiate between responsibilities of all authorizers from the responsibilities of local boards of education as authorizers. So again, we recommend acceptance of this item on first reading and happy to answer any questions you have.
There are no questions. Is there a motion to approve?
So approved, so move.
Mr. Eby, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Morrow, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved. Thank you.
Thanks. The third item I'm presenting on first reading is our Charter Schools Waiver Request Rule 0520-14-02. Similar to the last one, this relates to changes made to by Public Chapter 219. And this item proposes updates to the Charter School Waivers Request Rule to reflect citation and technical language changes in alignment with amendments to this public chapter. So the rule has not been substantially revised. We recommend acceptance of this item on first reading and happy to answer any questions.
There are no questions. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Ferguson, is there a second? Second. Mr. Darnell? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3D, Educator Licensure Policy 5.502.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Amy Owen, Director of Policy and Research for the State Board. Educator Licensure Policy 5.502 outlines requirements related to the issuance, renewal, and advancement of educator licenses in Tennessee. This policy complements our educator licensure rule, which had a pretty comprehensive rewrite in 2019 based on Public Chapter 929 of 2018. That public chapter required that any item that affects the rights and privileges of a third party be contained in rule rather than in policy. So as you can imagine, educators being third parties to state government, a lot of this needed to move into rule. Now that that rule is in effect as of November 2019, we are removing some duplicative language from the policy and instead directing readers to the rule to get the information. We try not to have the exact same information in two places. It's just too easy to forget to update it in one place and not the other and get out of alignment. So that's the major change. You'll see a lot of items deleted from this policy, but it's because they've been moved to rule. There were also changes to Appendix A to clarify options for educators to earn professional development points, and updating the list of active endorsements in Appendix B to indicate licenses or endorsement types rather that have been retired or ones that will be new and when those will take effect. Just a note, even if an educator has an endorsement that has been retired, they can still continue to teach using that endorsement. It's simply no longer issued to new educators. With that, we recommend acceptance of this item on first reading.
There are no questions. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Coppin? Is there a second? Mr. Eby? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Do you have the next item?
Thank you. The employment standards rule would be a new rule. We propose numbering 0520-02-06. Currently, employment standards, which are requirements for certain school and district level positions that are not covered by an endorsement area, are housed in our administrative rules and requirements rule. Frankly, they're a little bit buried there. They're difficult to find. We're interested in streamlining our rules, including the administrative rules and requirements. And one way we thought to do that was by moving these requirements for certain types of positions to a standalone rule that's contained in our section of rules that deals with educator licensure and preparation. So largely, this is a copy and paste, removing it from the administrative rules into a standalone rule. We did work with the department to modernize some of the language and terms used about certain employment standard types, and we anticipate continuing that process before final reading. We will have a rulemaking hearing, so we're able to hear from educators and districts who are using these employment standards for their positions. So we'll be able to get that feedback and make some updates before final reading.
Mr. Eby?
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Under 0520020603 supervisors, which I think is the bottom of the second page, it says a principal of a school with fewer than 225 students shall not be required to meet the requirements for licensure set forth in the state board rule. First, how many principals does that represent across Tennessee? And help me with the reasoning why we would not require principals to have a license.
I have not been able to obtain the data yet on how many schools in Tennessee that affects, but I'll be happy to have that for you on final reading. This is a direct allowance that comes from statute. So we are repeating the law here in order to give this allowance.
Yeah, I would like to know how many that impacts.
I would like to know when that law went into effect and if we had any understanding as to what the rationale on the legislature was. If it's ancient, they may want to go back and revisit it, or they may not.
Sure. Happy to dig into that before final reading.
I have a clear, did you have something else?
Oh, I think Nathan was getting ready to say something.
Okay, please.
So, all right, Madam Chair, I can certainly talk to him afterwards. If you're asking specifically about the statute that realigned the rulemaking process and what needs to be in rule versus policy, in the last 2 or 3 years that took place, and it actually was part of a very comprehensive piece of legislation that also sort of redefined the relationship with boards and set out some free speech guarantees actually to members and also to state employees. But most specifically, it reflected a greater concern by the government operations committees that anything that can affect a third party would have to go through the public scrutiny of the rulemaking process. And that is it was a fairly sizable shift.
Thank you for that. On gifted education, I just have a point for clarification. It's 2D, I don't see the page number. It says individual serving as a gifted education coordinator in special or general education shall not serve as a consulting teacher in gifted education unless they meet the requirements of a consulting teacher in gifted education under this rule. I asked this clarification from you before, but would you clarify? I would imagine that's because the qualifications for the consulting teacher are different from the coordinator. Is that truly the case? Because I
That's
was a bit
correct.
confused when I was reading the language above in
You can think of a
Wonderful.
consulting teacher as somebody who's delivering services directly to students, whereas a coordinator is somebody who is designing what that course or program of study will be, or coordinating service times and personnel, so not necessarily having services directly to students.
Thank you. Mr. Eby?
Let me just clarify what I'd like for you to bring back to us next week. And I understand this is in statute, but, you know, someday you may be able to change it. So what I'd like to know is how many schools are there that have fewer than 225 students that then would be eligible to have a principal that's not licensed, point one. And point two, how many actual principals, schools do we have that are not licensed?
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve? Sorry.
Oh,
Is there-
we might have some quick information from our council.
I can give you, Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the State Board. I can give you a little bit of information about the specific statute that you're asking a question about. That statute was passed in 1986 and updated in 1988. So it is a little bit old. It is phrased differently than the rule because it's phrased in terms of the number of teachers in that building. I think the rule references more in terms of students because it's taking into account class sizes. But yes, we can definitely look into that and get you some
So if that's
information.
over 30 years old, I think our commissioner would tell us that our education has come up in the last 30 years. So maybe
Yeah.
this is something that we might want to talk to our legislators about changing.
And the statute itself refers to if the school has less than 9 teachers, they don't even have to have a full-time principal. So it's phrased a little bit differently than the rule, but that is where this is coming from.
Thank you. Yes.
I appreciate the assist.
Is there a motion to approve? Wow. There's no motion to approve. What does that mean? What was that?
I would say go back and revisit this thing.
If there's no motion to approve, then it
Then
dies for a lack of motion.
It dies for lack of a vote. Okay.
All right.
One more time, is there a motion to approve?
Just one question. So on the final reading, then, we're still at, explain to me the difference between this reading and the final reading.
It gives us an opportunity to get feedback from the field. However, if we're not approving it on first reading, I'm not sure if that changes any of that. If we have to have it come back, I believe we'll have to have it come back on first reading,
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. It would have to be a new proposal.
so it would be delayed.
I guess my feeling would be, why should we set a policy on something that's over 30 years old when we might want to look at seeing how it can be changed?
What are the ramifications of not moving forward?
Sure. Part of this we were hoping to have this on first reading now, so it would be on final reading in May, at the same time that these employment standards would be removed from the administrative rules and regulations on final reading. So it would also delay the vote on the administrative rules and regulations. Just to note that this requirement is currently in effect in our administrative rules and regulations. So hear your concern loud and clear on whether or not this is still appropriate. That will be a legislative discussion. Angie, do you want to add anything further about ramifications to rulemaking?
Sure. And one other point I would make is that regardless of whether we take that language out, I think we could certainly take that reference out of our rule on final reading. The only I guess caveat to that would be is that the law itself would still be in effect, so it really wouldn't change anything. But we could continue to have those conversations, and it sounds like the board may be more comfortable moving forward with the rule if that language was specifically removed. So yes, we can definitely take y'all's feedback and come back on final reading, but we wouldn't want to have a situation where you moved forward with administrative rules and regulations on final reading at the next meeting where this language is removed, and then all of the other employment standards that we do want to keep in place then live nowhere. And we don't want to run into that situation.
Mr. Cross?
Having staff a similar body for higher education, it's appropriate, I think, for us to give the staff a very clear expectation for what success means for this to succeed in the future. And so whether that's specific questions we have, or if you have concerns now, it's also a proper motion for you to, I believe, present that as an amendment.
Yes, Madam Chair, the body can proceed in a number of different ways. A member could move to adopt it on first reading with instructions. Okay, that is to say, to instruct the staff to accomplish X, Y, Z before it's brought back on second reading. Or a member could vote to approve it on first reading and create the expectation that there will be amendments brought next time. If, however, there is no motion to move it forward today, you cannot have it on the second reading next time.
But you could have it on first reading.
You could have it on first reading, but it would put it off in terms of the administrative tempo. It would cause some obvious problems. So the question is, would the body like to instruct the staff or pass it, with the understanding that that doesn't mean it's going to make it past its second?
I think my point was we have other options other than causing what sounds like a few chain reactions that the board could be comfortable with, expressing opinions rather than just it dying for lack of emotion.
Madam Chair, I would like to amend the proposed plan to take out paragraph number 1, 0520-02-06-03 supervisors that says a principal of school with fewer than 225 students shall not be required, blah, 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 blah. Take that out, and then I would move to accept the policy as approved and ask for the information that I've specifically requested in the future.
Madam Chairman, those are separate motions and need to be
Right.
taken individually. So the first motion is on the amendment.
Exactly. So we have a motion.
To amend.
Is everyone clear to amend? Is everyone clear on that motion? Mr. Edwards?
Can I ask Angie a question? So, Mr. Eves is kind of what I was thinking would be a good way to get to it. Is there a unintended consequence with his emotion?
Well, it's just on first reading. So I think we would want to go back and have some additional conversations. We're going to have a rulemaking hearing on this rule. So for districts that are watching, we would really want to hear if there are some unintended consequences. I know the law itself specifically says schools with, I think it's less than 9 teachers don't have to have a full-time principal. Do they have teacher or principals in buildings that are not licensed who then they would just take them out of that building and that building would be without a principal? I think we would want to hear what the actual impact of that change would be, and then we will definitely communicate to you all what we've heard before bringing this back on final reading, including that language or not including it.
Regardless of what action we take, it may not be taken up by the legislature. So
Madam-
it's still in effect, correct?
Madam Chair, the bill filing deadline was this week as far as that goes. I mean, while it's still possible that a caption bill could be amended to make this change, the question is quite separate from where we are. It's we don't have, as we have in other cases, we don't have a letter from a standing committee chairman that says we're going to take this matter up and please expect changes on it. At this point, it becomes an ask to see if there's a bill out there that could be so amended, but I think it would be unwise for the body to proceed as if that is going to happen.
And with that being said, it draws into question, from my opinion, that by removing it, that doesn't really negate that it occurs, that it's valid, it's in law. Us removing it I don't think changes it. That's just one person's opinion. I'll get to you in a minute, Mr. Edwards. And so I think we need help from you, Nathan, and/or you, Angie, to help us navigate these waters, because they're a little bit treacherous.
The motion is on the amendment, and it needs to have a second before it can be properly before the body.
Okay. So would you please restate your motion, and then we'll see if we have a second.
I move to amend the recommended rule to remove paragraph 1 under 0520-02-06-03 supervisors.
Is there a second?
I would second.
Mr. Edwards? Any
Yeah,
further discussion?
Let me explain why I second it.
Okay.
I'm pretty certain that no one on this board had a clue that a school with 250 kids could be operating totally in another parallel universe. And once we discovered that, we've had a great deal of conversation with the idea that we ought to take what action we have. I'd also be willing to bet that the legislature has no institutional memory out of the tens of thousands of laws and statutes that they don't know. And I think it would be helpful if I was in the, just to be made aware of it in case I did want to do something about it. Because I can tell you, the number of people who know anything about this is pretty thin, I would imagine. So
You're probably right. Any further discussion?
And I would also say, again, our focus has got to be on the students and what's best for the students, having a principal that's not licensed or having a licensed principal.
Any other discussion? Mr. Morrow?
Two things. One is just point of clarification. So removing this from here doesn't change anything, functionally, because it's in the law.
Well, actually, if we pass it on second reading, it goes into effect until the end of the calendar year, or fiscal year, right?
Yes, sir, and that's and pending review of the Joint Government Operations Committee, and they would make a decision whether to have it incorporated or not incorporated into the Omnibus Rules Bill. And it's through that Omnibus Rules Bill that the rule would stay in effect after that point in time.
Which would then make it, make them aware of the situation that we have, and then make them, allow them to decide, is this something that we want or something that we don't want?
So one thing, if I may, Madam Chair, is that to understand the operational tempo of that committee as well. So they are in the middle of session right now, which means if we're looking at, passing the rule potentially, I guess is what you're saying, to trigger the review by them, but it wouldn't be passed until May. Is that correct? And so then you would have a month or two before it's reviewed, and it'll be long after the session is adjourned, sine die. So whatever actions we take here will not necessarily trigger any legislation this year. It could set up a problem or not a problem, but it could set up a chain of events that could not be rectified by the General Assembly until January of next year, and a new General Assembly is seated.
May I, Mr. Morrow, I think you were asking, would this have a practical implication, given that the law is still in effect?
That's correct.
The law would remain in effect and the law would supersede any of our rules. Our rules would simply be silent about this issue. So districts could still have the flexibility as written in law.
All right. That was my second point, is just and I'm assuming that with 30 years ago, but I'm assuming that in some very small schools that have budgetary restrictions, you have a lead teacher who is both teaching and leading the building at the same time, and it was a way to practically live out running a school as well as you can, given the resources you have. And I just, which why I love the certification, think there needs to be an expectation of quality and standards and those things, but I wouldn't want to, that was my question, was just I don't want to do something here that all of a sudden takes a school that I may not be aware of, or we may not be aware of, that is in some little place that would create a lot of unnecessary dysfunction while we're trying to bring awareness to the legislature that this does exist.
Sure.
So that was about the question. Thank you.
Also helped me out, Nathan, last night at dinner, I was with Senator Pody, and he informed that the Government Ops actually is the only committee that meets the full year. So again, I think this is something, if we bring this up now, take it to Government Ops, it gives them plenty of time to look at it so that when we go into the next legislative session, it might be something that would be, go for it.
Mr. James?
Madam Chairman, and I appreciate the Vice Chairman's conversation with Senator Pody last night. Functionally, the limitations on that committee's authority are quite unique. It is the youngest of the standing committees, at least on the Senate side, and its authority extends over rules in a way that affects the next omnibus rule bill the next year. So yes, they do meet year-round. They're the only committee, besides fiscal review and a couple of others, that does that. But it doesn't mean that this set of situations will trigger that apparatus and for them to originate legislation, which in itself would be the jurisdiction of the education committees and not the Committee on Government Operations. What I would be happy to do, whether you decide to pass this on first reading or decide not to or amend it in whatever way, I'm certainly happy to work with interested legislative staff who are both here and watching on streaming to see if we couldn't work something into a cleanup bill. And that may be the easiest way, because that could potentially have the problem solved this year without having to necessarily trigger anything functionally through passing or not passing this on first reading.
We still have a motion and we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment is approved. Now we're going to entertain a motion to approve the employment standards rule as amended. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Mr. Eby, is there a second? Second. Mr. Ferguson, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll return at 10:37 sharply. Thank you.
Houston County's got 4 schools with 1,200 total kids.
catering's arriving at 11:30, but take your...
I know everyone is having a great discussion, but we are already, I'm late, so you're late. Please sit down. I have this gavel for a purpose. We're back in session. I'm going to pass some bills. No. We're going to pass bills now. Okay, we're going to move into our action items on final reading. The first item is item 4A, the board meeting policy 1.400.
Hello, and thank you, Chair. I'm Katherine Johnson, Policy Coordinator with the State Board of Education. I'm here to present Board Meeting Policy 1.400 on final reading. There has been one change since first reading, and that is to add special courses to the list of items requiring only one reading. Special courses are courses submitted by districts to the Department of Education for approval and vetting. And then once the department has vetted these courses, they are submitted to the state board for final approval. By allowing these to go forward on one vote instead of first and final, it will allow these districts to implement these courses more quickly. Are there any questions?
There are no questions. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Darnell, the second? Mr. Jensen, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved. Thank you. Item 4B, pupil transportation rule. Do we have a presenter?
Should be Mr. Joseph Chilton from the Department of Education. Is there another person from the Department of Education able to speak to this rule? Can we roll it to May?
Just roll it to next time.
We're going to move on to the next item in case this individual shows up. Okay, item 4C, career technical education standards.
Good morning again. My name is Steve Plale. I'm Senior Director of College and Career Experiences for the Department of Education. Presenting this agenda item on second reading, the Career and Technical Education Standards for revision and new course standards added to our Career and Technical Education Programs of Study. This was presented in first reading in November regarding courses in agriculture, food and natural resources, health science, hospitality and tourism, and transportation career clusters. Since first reading, revisions have been made, minor revisions, have been made to the pharmacological science course based on advisory board and industry feedback to improve the flow and organization of the standards. No major content changes were made, minor word revisions and structure of where those standards fall. The personal finance standards are being held for final reading until May 2020 to allow time for further stakeholder input regarding the personal finance standards. Once we began gathering feedback after first reading, we came to the realization that we need to do a little bit deeper dive there with our advisory council and gather more industry feedback. So with no further comments, recommend to approve from the Department of Education.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Edwards, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Eby, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 4D, professional assessments for Tennessee educators policy.
Good morning, David Allenson, Chief of Human Capital. Good morning, Chairwoman, members of the board, Commissioner Schwinn, and Amy. It's good to see you, and also want to specifically say thank you to Amy and Sarah for their help in our items that are being presented today, as well as earlier that Amy led on. So specifically, thank you for that. This first item, you may remember in November I presented on this item, which would actually allow for an alternative option specifically for teachers to teach Spanish and French other than the Praxis. Well, I can tell you yesterday I had my ear tugged and pulled by Superintendent Freddie Curtis from Canyon County, who couldn't be more excited because he finally found a Spanish teacher who has passed the ALTA assessment and would love for this to be approved today, because then he has a Spanish teacher. And so this item allows for that, as well as just making some changes around various requirements that we're in the process of ending and updating that. If there's any questions.
I spoke to him yesterday.
Oh.
He thought it was being pulled. And I said, I'm not aware of it being pulled, but I know he'll be excited if it's approved today. Thank you.
Great.
Any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Ferguson, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Morrow, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have the next item?
Yes, ma'am. Or yes, Chairwoman. Teacher and Administrator Evaluation Policy 5.201. This item, the main thing on this, you all are very familiar with pre-K and K portfolios. This is the one that we talked about in November that would actually establish criteria for what would allow for an alternative to these portfolios. This is something that we did a lot of engagement on this issue with superintendents, and are very excited to have this item addressed. In addition, we are adding an alternative observation model class for pre-K teachers, which actually reduces the burden on districts for the amount of observations that need to take place. And we will be coming back to the board, because right now class measures on 7 levels of effectiveness, and we'll come back to the board in May on that one to have that be a 5-level system model in alignment with current practice.
I have a question.
Mr. Darnell?
Just for the information of the board, can you give us some, what are the main differences between team and class? If you were doing a pre-K evaluation, what would be the biggest difference?
I'm actually going to defer to Darlene, who is our head of pre-K, who is our senior expert on all things class.
And my cohort, Misty. Hi, good morning. Thank you, everyone. I'm Darlene Estes Del Rey, and I'm happy to direct the discussion questions. The main thing about the class tool that's pretty exciting for pre-K is that it is designed for that specific age span. So the observation measures are already for that age group. So like when you are trying to think about with team, when you're thinking about when you walk into a classroom of littles, they're all moving, and you say, is this what on task looks like? I'm not sure. Are we pacing? Like all of those unknowns become very nicely translated with the class tool. You don't have to guess, and it's already, like spelled out for the specific age group. So it looks at also emotional domain. It looks at the environment that's built for the pre-K student and the instructional elements.
Did you want to? Only thing I would add is class is really geared towards looking at the interaction between the teacher and child. And so it's really about what is being said and how we're encouraging children to think. And I guess the only other thing I would say is to mirror what Darlene said, it's just very developmentally appropriate for pre-K.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Eby, is there a second? Second. Ms. Kim, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved.
Thank you, and the children will love it.
Thank you.
They will.
I should take her with me everywhere I go.
She's delightful. Yeah. You have the next item?
Yes, Chairwoman. Strategic Compensation Policy 5.6. This one we discussed in November. This allows us to actually, for the first time as a Department of Education, to actually collect teacher vacancy data. When I last spoke, we had partnered with TOS, and they were able to collect teacher vacancy data from over 120 districts. Why is this so important? Because updated data, as of last week, tells us we have 1,123 teaching vacancies right now in this state, at a minimum. 274 of those vacancies are in K-3 classrooms. 217 of them are in 4 through 8, 161 in special education, 115 in math. Based on that math alone, conservative estimates would have 13,000 students do not have a math teacher in the state of Tennessee right now. Over 50% of districts have vacancies. Yesterday, I got a phone call, Board Member Edwards from Knox County. They were in Atlanta recruiting, specifically for alums from Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, Atlanta. It's important, as we all know, to diversify our workforce. They said, David, they're not coming right now with the praxis requirements that are in place. I got a call from Lincoln County yesterday saying they have a teacher from Alabama ready to come up. That just turned them down because they found out about the praxis. I know I'm going to ask respectfully, and if the board does consider having a specially called meeting this month, in light of the previous conversation, I ask for your consideration to potentially add the out-of-state licensure item that was pulled from the agenda for consideration. And then I know everybody here wants every classroom with the most effective educator. As we all know right now, this is a yes and approach. This vacancy data is one step to us to know what the issue is. Once you know what the issue is, you can come up with those solutions. But for now, it's approval of the vacancy data, and I will hopefully request that we'll be able to add that in the future as well. Thank you.
We hope to include it in the future as well.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for your consideration.
Okay. Any questions or further discussion?
Question.
Yes, Mr. Dodd.
Would this vacancy data include waivers? Positions that have, I'm not certified to teach biology, but I'm going to have to because there's no one else.
Correct. So in this scenario that TOS collected, they did include teachers that were on waivers. It also included teachers that were on permits. For those that may not know, a permitted teacher is someone with a bachelor's degree that only has 6 credit hours in the area of study. As of last school year, you didn't have to have any requirements other than a bachelor's degree. So when we think about vacancies with substitutes, we think about people with permits that just have 6 credit hours. We need to do more. As far as what the specifics will look like in the future, as far as collecting vacancy data, I think those in the audience that are superintendents and TASPA can attest that we will work together, as well as with TOS, to determine what is the best way to do this so that it is not a burden on behalf of our districts. We're going to look specifically how TOS did this so that we can use that. But also more importantly, as districts make up their strategic compensation policies, we want to make sure that it's aligned to the needs in their specific districts. Right now, they have some that would actually pay for the praxis exam. It'd be amazing if they didn't have to do that because it no longer was required to come into the state of Tennessee.
Yes, Mr. Edwards.
So, I got several questions. One, was Knox County willing to use differential pay to recruit those teachers?
Every district has to have a differential pay program, and I can tell you Scott Bolton, their HR team, are some of the most innovative HR people in this state.
Yeah, he called me too.
Yep.
It's right in the middle of my chicken. But were they willing to offer, I know they've got the plan. Mm-hmm. Were they using that plan to recruit those teachers?
As of the last plan that was submitted, and I believe, I know I mentioned this in November, and I'm not going to speak specifically to Knox, because I know that's what you're asking, but I have had multiple districts, including 4 of the 5 big ones, say they've stopped out-of-state recruitment because of the barriers. Even if you're able to get somebody when they, I mean, let's think about moving costs, let alone then an additional $500 if you have to take up to 3 of these exams. I've had, there's a superintendent right now that told me about how he had to take the Praxis exam to come in. So those are things where strategic comp plans are, a lot of them are not focused on out-of-state recruitment right now because they're not getting the return on investment to do out-of-state recruitment trips. The fact that Knox County was out there this week in Atlanta was because they were optimistic of potential changes.
So is there heartburn with Praxis having to pay the fee? Or is it the pain of taking the test?
It has to do with so right now you don't need to take the Praxis if your scores are within the last 5 years. So what does that mean? It means if I have 5 or more years of experience, I'm being told I'm not good enough to come into here right now, that I have to prove what I know. And it also, from a district perspective, a tough part on that is it's saying that districts don't know who's the best teachers to put in front of their children. And I think, I can understand concerns, but I think the bigger concern for me right now is the 13,000 students that don't have a math teacher.
Well, technically, you could have solved that and still not have a math teacher. And I'll give you an example. We've talked about it, or certainly I have, ad nauseum. So the Praxis exam is, 60 questions, 10 of them are field testing, so you're getting down to 50 questions. You score 32 out of that 50, and we give an endorsement in math for every course from 8th grade all the way through advanced calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always sort of wanted to get comfortable with, can you get to 32 and not know beans about several courses that you're endorsed in?
Mm-hmm.
So if that was to happen, then I would argue that class does not have a math teacher in advanced calculus because they're wanting a way to go and verify their competency, not in just math overall, but in that one specific discipline.
Mm-hmm.
What I've started to think is that rather than trying to rethink the endorsement blanket, but have a way to verify a teacher's competency in a course before they're allowed to go into that classroom. Now, right now, we're putting them in classrooms if they got an English degree on that waiver. But if we're going to use Praxis with everything from 8th grade through any other math course that's got math written on it, then we ought to have some mechanism to do exactly what you're saying for that gentleman or lady and no, here's how we're going to determine if we should put you in this classroom, rather than, because there are school districts all over the country that are doing what they shouldn't be doing,
Mm-hmm.
as well as those that are doing great at what they're doing. We need to be able to differentiate between those two and without them getting offended.
Mm-hmm.
But we still need to know if we're going to put them in a class, if they know the content.
Yeah.
And I fully understand 13,000 kids. Really, if you stop and think about it, if you look at chemistry and physics and a whole bunch of other stuff, it gets really alarming. And we've got to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Opening up the gates may do it. Paying moving fees and testing fees and differential pay is a way that the private sector does a whole lot of its recruitment.
Director Edwards, I want to thank you for that. And I think it's a yes and approach, right? So the governor's committed to funding programs like Grow Your Own, which if you stay tuned, we might have some news in your district. We're committed to the Governor's Fellows, which over 1,000 individuals will be able to become a teacher for free. And I already thank Mike Kraus for our preliminary conversations about partnering on that work. It's incredibly exciting, building on Tea and Promise. The reason I say yes and is we have to do something now in addition to. Some of the other things we're looking at is even working with every district that has parapros that already have a bachelor's degree, and they can go through. In Metro Nashville, for example, they partner with National Teacher Residency. How can we expand that and have more individuals? So it's a yes and approach, and one thing I've been very positive about with Amy and Sarah is we're specifically looking to talk about math in the month of May at that board meeting about how we can look at that issue, even potentially considering keeping the full math credential, but also potentially having additional credentials for Algebra 1, for Algebra 2, where you would have to demonstrate individual subject mastery to get those credentials, and that would give districts more flexibility to staff appropriately. So your point is very well taken.
David, I know that you have been working very closely with Sarah and with Amy, and I know that you're driving to find solutions that make sense and that maintain the quality. But I want to go on record as saying this, and I know that we all had great engaging conversations yesterday with directors of schools. And so they're held accountable, and I think we just need to remember that too. I don't know a director of schools that is not deeply concerned about finding the best possible educator to be in their classrooms. They don't want to keep a teacher that's not effective, highly effective.
Right.
So I think we need to keep that in mind as we talk about this and work on finding solutions that make sense and that directors' hands are not tied and that we can still ensure that we have the best and the brightest in the classroom. And I don't think we found the solutions yet. But I know you all are working on them, and things had to get pulled for various reasons. So I know you'll continue that great work.
You said it best, Chairwoman. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Jensen.
One comment. Could you, for clarification purposes, in May, help us to understand better the delineations on the praxis? For example, does an Algebra 1 and geometry teacher have to pass the Algebra 2 and calculus in order to teach those two subjects? And then I suggested yesterday to Mr. Cobbins that we all should have to take the praxis, and he said that he flatly refused to do it. So, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
This was a significant conversation at our tables with the superintendents as well, and it was just the idea of wanting more sort of local control of discernment between putting quality. Again, everybody wants to have great teachers in front of their students. And knowing that, there was this conversation about the tension between accountability and flexibility. And so if you have greater flexibility, then there's going to have to be a higher level of accountability that ensures the quality, but at the same time wanting to really pay attention to the unique needs of districts, especially those that border states. People who live 5 miles from the school in Alabama wanting to teach in this school. They did their student teaching in this school, and now they've seen them in action. They're a great teacher, and yet now couldn't be employed from August to November while they were going through certain conditions to then be acceptable. And so I think the work here is really important about understanding both, how, we can have this idea of, the best people in front of our students that we can possibly have. And I think the governor just said, to have great schools and have great teachers, going to be a great state has to be a great state to be a teacher. And so I think we need to pay attention to our employability and attractiveness from bordering states as well. And if people are not interested in coming to the state of Tennessee to teach, we need to pay attention to that, or we need to do a better job of keeping the people in our state to teach. One of those two things. And so I just want to echo what our chairman said.
Thank you for those comments.
Yeah. And if-
Any other? Yes.
Just one last thing, and one thing I would, thank you for everybody. Thank you for listening to the superintendents. I do it every day. We are all collectively here to support and serve. I can also say that our phones are ringing off the hook due to the news around this strategic plan. With the governor's state of the state, people are looking at Tennessee. Tennessee is the fastest improving state due to all the work that board members have done and the staff previous, but with whole child supports, with this literacy initiative, let alone Grow Your Own, where we're actually creating pathways for people to become a teacher for free and get paid to do so. We have a good problem on our hands, and I know collectively we can solve it together. So I just want to put that out there. This ambitious plan and a governor's commitment, this is the best place to be in the country right now for education.
Thank you, I agree. Any other comments, questions? Is there a motion to approve the strategic compensation policy 5.600, lest we forgot what we're talking about? Is there a motion? Mr. Ferguson? Mr. Jensen provides the second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 4G, Personnel Policy 1.300.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members. My name is Angie Sanders. I'm the General Counsel for the State Board of Education. I'm presenting to you on first and final reading amendments to Personnel Policy 1.300. TCA 491305 sets forth the role and responsibilities of the Executive Director of the State Board of Education and his or her staff. These are proposed changes to add a new section on settlement authority, formalizing the process for how the board handles legal settlements. Additionally, there are a few clarifications in the section regarding the qualifications of the executive director. With that summary, I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.
Mr. Eby?
Yes, I would like to talk about amending this a couple of places, specifically one, under the executive director, it says, individual hired shall prior to commencing employment with the state board resign any position of employment or official position within any other department, agency, or board. I think probably we ought to say any other state department or board, and we may also want to add any other state or conflicting department, agency, or board, because I know I'm on several different boards. I presume everyone else is, and I think we need to clarify that. So I would move to amend that to say any other state or conflicting department, agency, or board. That's one motion.
Before you
Okay.
go away, where exactly are you? I'm sorry.
First paragraph under executive director, to the red.
Okay.
So the last sentence under the first paragraph and one,
The red line?
the red line
Statement.
portion.
Oh. And Nathan just said that she sits on the Higher Education Commission, so we need to exempt that out from that. So we need to say, other than the Higher Education Commission, any other state or conflicting department, agency, or board.
I think that's fine. This language does come from statute, and I think we're just further putting some meat on that language in terms of we're speaking about a state agency or board or THEC.
We're going to take your amendment separately, and so I would appreciate it if you would restate your amendment.
Okay. I would like to amend the first paragraph. Second sentence says, an individual hired as executive director by the board shall, prior to commencing employment with the state board, resign any position of employment or official position with any other state, department, or conflicting agency of the board, excepting the Tennessee Higher Education Commission and the BEP Review Commission.
We have a motion to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ferguson, any discussion? All in favor of this amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment is approved. Now we have a second amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
In the third paragraph, the same section, it says the executive director shall, the second paragraph. The compensation of the executive director shall be fixed by the board, and such compensation shall not be less than the compensation provided for an assistant commissioner in the Department of Education. I understand that statute, but I would like to add, say it shall not be less than the compensation provided for the Assistant Commissioner in the Department of Education commensurate with the responsibility of the position and comparable to positions within the administration.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Edwards, any discussion?
The reason I'd like to add this is I think her position is much more than just a deputy commissioner, and I think we ought to put that in writing.
Agreed.
That's fine.
Any further discussion?
She wants to.
Yes,
I said, I think that's fine. Yeah.
that's okay.
Friendly amendment.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. Any further discussion? One more time. All in favor of this amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This amendment is approved. Do you have other amendments?
Nope.
Thank you. So now we are going to move to approve this item with these as amended. Do we have a motion to approve? Do we have a Mr. Edwards, do we have a second? Mr. Morrow, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved. Thank you. Moving to item 4H, Charter School Governing Board Training Rule.
Hello again, Allie Gaffey, Deputy Director of the State Board of Charter Schools for the State Board, not the whole State Board. On final reading today is our Charter School Governing Body Training Rule 0520-14-01-.07. As we discussed earlier this morning, Public Chapter 219 amended the language to now require that any training course used by the charter school governing body be certified by the Tennessee Charter School Center and approved by the State Board. So this rule sets up the process for the approval of a training course by the State Board and provides specific training course requirements for a charter school governing body. Since first reading, our staff gathered additional feedback from stakeholders and also conducted a rulemaking hearing this past December. So the following changes were made prior to today's final reading. Firstly, we increased the training requirement for new charter school governing board members to 6 hours within the first 12 months of appointment. The second change is that we increased the training requirement for those continuing service on a charter school governing board after their first year to 4 hours annually. And finally, to allow individuals to meet the training requirements through the option of one course or multiple courses. So upon approval, the State Board staff will send communication regarding this rule to both charter school leaders and governing boards. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
There are no questions. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Eby, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Edwards, any further discussion? This is a rule, therefore it requires a roll call vote. Mr. Casey, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim. Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you. Item 4I, Charter School Performance Framework.
Good morning. My name is Tess Stovall. I'm the Director of Charter Schools for the State Board of Education. I'm presenting on final reading today the State Board's Charter School Performance Framework. Specifically, there were changes made on first reading to the financial section of the performance framework to align the framework to the government accounting standards, which is what charter schools are audited by annually. We work with our charter schools on these updates as well as an external financial consultant, and there have been no changes between first and final reading on this item. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Edwards, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Cobbins? Last call for further discussion. She was talking to me.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you. Item 4J, Charter School Local Education Agency Policies.
Good morning. My name is Nate Parker, and I'm the Coordinator of Policy and Federal Programs for the Tennessee State Board. Today I'm presenting first and final reading for an update to two of our policies that govern our board-authorized charter schools. The proposed update is for State Board LEA Policy 6309, which regards zero tolerance policy, and Policy 6317 regarding the required remands and student disciplinary hearing authority policy. The update is in response to revised language in TCA 49-6-3401, which permits either the director of schools or the head of a charter school to make any modifications to zero tolerance disciplinary actions on a case-by-case basis. Our recommendation is to change the language of our policies to reflect the head of a charter school. This is within the spirit of our focus to provide greater flexibility and autonomy to our board-authorized charter schools when possible. If approved, the State Board staff will work to support our individual schools with necessary revisions to their school policies. The State Board staff recommends approval of these on final reading, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Mr. Eby?
Yes, in paragraph 2, the last sentence is the director of schools designee will consult with the authorized charter school regarding the special circumstances and will come to a decision regarding the proposed modifications of the required remand within 7 business days. So if I read this correctly, the paragraph before talks about if you have a remand suspension for more than 10 days. And then the next paragraph says if there's special circumstances, then the director of schools has 7 days to make a decision if somebody is. So what happens during those 7 days? Is the person suspended from school, or are they still in school during that period?
So this would depend on the school-specific policy and procedures they have around this, and that would be based on discipline code and the nature of the offense.
So it's possible that they would be in school, and then the director of school 7 days later would be, say, okay, we're going to suspend them for 10 days. But I assume, so the question is that child is in school, is there any concern with how the child would behave during those 7 days or anything like that?
I'll turn over to Testo Val just because I want to make sure that we speak to what the school would actually do on it.
So, thank you, Tess Stovall, Director of Charter Schools. So typically what happens, and we have had these instances happen a few times in the past, is that a student would be suspended for a certain period of time of out-of-school suspension. And during that time, during that 7-day period is when the appeal process would happen. So in most cases, a student would be on out-of-school suspension for a maximum of 10 days, because after that point, it is when they would have to be remanded to an alternative school. Certainly, we are in direct communication with our schools about any of these situations so that we can work with them on what the best situation is.
So, but the school then does have the choice of whether they want to suspend them or send them out or let them all out during that 7-day period.
Absolutely. Each school is required to have its own disciplinary code, and that aligns to the minimum requirements of state law and federal law. And that's something that we audit annually with our charter schools to ensure it aligns with state law. But yes, it would be up to the individual school to determine if a student's offense required an out-of-school suspension and for how long.
Is that implied in here, or do we need to clarify that?
We have another LEA policy that's on discipline, in which it goes into much more specific detail regarding that. So I think that's probably covered. Okay. Always happy to take a look and make sure it's clear and consistent for our schools.
Yeah, please just take a look at that.
I will, absolutely.
One further question. Is that in that language, is it also sort of laid out the due process policy for a family who, okay, is that in the same?
Correct, in the DHA policy?
Yeah.
Yes, the policy itself lays out the appeals process that they would go through, and that already exists in that policy.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Eby, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Morrow, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you. The next item is item 4K, Occupational Educator Scholarship Rule. and this requires a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This rule is actually very exciting. It's a new program that was established by Chapter 204 of the Public Acts of 2019 that creates an occupational educator scholarship program for prospective educators who are seeking an occupational Tennessee teaching license. That would be in certain career and technical education fields. Specifically, the program provides a scholarship for the cost of attending an education preparation provider for prospective educators who agree to teach for 4 years in an occupational CTE area, specifically giving priority to rural and distressed counties, educators who seek to teach in those areas. This final reading item establishes rules for implementation of the scholarship. It was on first reading at a called meeting in September 2019, and since that time, the State Board held a rulemaking hearing in December of 2019 and incorporated feedback both from the public and from the Attorney General's office on how to make specific terms clearer in the rule so that folks would understand how the program would be implemented. I'm happy to take any questions.
There are no questions. Do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Ferguson, is there a second? Mr. Jensen provides a second. Any further discussion? This is a roll call vote. Mr. Casey?
Mr. Cobbins? Mr. Darnell? Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards? Mr. Ferguson? Mr. Jensen? Ms. Kim? Mr. Morrow? Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go back to item 4B, pupil transportation rule. This also requires a roll call vote.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Thank you. I'm here to present Pupil Transportation Rule 05-20-0105. This rule outlines the requirements for the operation of and minimum standards for school buses. There's been no changes since the first reading. And we recommend approval on this item for final reading. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Sorry, I'm staring at Mr. Edwards and thinking he's going to give me a motion, but he didn't. Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Sir, would you announce your name?
Sorry. Joseph Chilton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cobbins? Mr. Darnell? Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards? Mr. Ferguson? Mr. Jensen? Ms. Kim? Mr. Morrow? Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. We're going to move into Section 5, Charter School Appeal Actions. Item 5A, Nashville Classical Charter School Appeal.
Good morning. I am Tess Stovall, Director of Charter Schools for the State Board of Education. I am presenting this recommendation on behalf of Dr. Morrison. I want to refer the board and anyone listening in the audience to the board's conversation and presentation on this appeal yesterday, as well as reread a statement in response to the recommendation from Metro Nashville Public Schools. Nashville Classical appealed the denial of their amendment petition by Metro Nashville Public Schools to the State Board of Education. Nashville Classical petitioned MNPS to increase the maximum enrollment in their charter agreement from 450 students to 527. It stated in its rationale that the need for this change was to continue to serve its current student body through the 8th grade. It is currently serving K through 6th grade students. MNPS reviewed 4 amendment petitions in the fall, and the Office of Charter Schools recommended the approval of all 4 of those amendment petitions. The MNPS board approved 3 of the 4 petitions, Nashville Classical being the one that they denied. In its denial of Nashville Classical amendment petition, Metro Nashville Public Schools cited 2 primary reasons First, fiscal impact of the amendment, and second, capacity of the schools near the school. So when analyzing the record, the State Board staff reviewed and considered MNPS's argument as well as the school's argument and evidence for both sides. So based on this review, Dr. Morrison's recommendation is to overturn MNPS's decision to deny the amendment petition and remand it back to the district with instructions to approve the amendment. Dr. Morrison determined it is in the best interest of the students, the LEA, and the community because, first, the amendment petition will allow the school to serve its current student body through the 8th grade, and the school worked with its community to revise the original amendment petition down to 527. The school is a high-performing school. It is in high demand. There's consistent and sustained demand from the parents in the neighborhood as well as the students in the school with a very low attrition rate. And the school has consistently outperformed the district and the state in TN Ready. Third, the school is pulling from students across the city of Nashville. One of the arguments from Metro Nashville Public Schools was that there was capacity available in the immediate zone schools near the charter school. However, when looking at the enrollment data for the school, it's not clear that the students from the charter school would directly enroll in any zone school in the immediate vicinity of the charter school. And while MNPS cited fiscal impact as a factor in its decision to deny, one of the 3 other petitions that the MNPS Board of Education considered and ultimately approved also had a fiscal impact on the district, based on the information that was presented by the MNPS Office of Charter Schools at the MNPS Board meeting. It's important to note that this information is different than what the MNPS officials and representatives presented to us at the public hearing, stating that there was no fiscal impact on this approved charter petition. But again, when the MNPS Office of Charter Schools presented the recommendation to the Board of Education, they cited a fiscal impact of this amendment petition. Therefore, Nashville Classical was one of the ones that had a fiscal impact but was denied by the board. It's important also to note that fiscal impact is a factor for the state board to consider when analyzing the best interests of the students, the LEA, and the community. However, it's not the only factor that the board can consider. So based on looking at the school's academic performance, the demand in the community for the school, and the reasonableness of the amendment to request an additional 72 students in capacity, it is Dr. Morrison's recommendation that the board overturn the district's decision and remand it back to MNPS with instructions to approve the amendment petition. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? We did have a rich discussion yesterday. Yes, Mr. Eby.
I was just going to make a comment that I think that Dr. Morrison and you did an outstanding job in researching this and then writing it up to make it very clear.
I agree wholeheartedly. Any other comments, questions? As I was saying, we did have.
I do think that I just
yes,
want to
go
say,
ahead.
Mr. Jensen had a question yesterday about the budget that I have an answer if he would
Please.
like that information.
Please.
Okay. The most latest approved budget for Metro Nashville Public Schools in the 2019-20 school year is a little over $922 million. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, for interrupting you.
No, I'm glad that you did. Thank you for that. I was saying we had a very lively discussion yesterday. I should call it lively, but very meaningful discussion. And as you indicated, anyone who wants to know how we discuss this in full, they can go back and listen to the live streaming or the YouTube video to hear the deliberation that took place. Is there a motion to approve the recommendation of the executive director? Mr. Jensen, sorry. Who provides the second? Mr. Morrow? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
We need to
Is
do a
there-
roll call vote, ma'am.
We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Casey?
Mr. Cobbins? Mr. Darnell? Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen? Ms. Kim? Mr. Morrow?
Aye.
Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you. Item 6, DHS licensure actions.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Brittany Kendrick with the Tennessee State Board of Education, Assistant General Counsel. So before you on information is the educators who have become non-compliant with their court order obligations. As I mentioned yesterday, initially when we posted these items on SharePoint, there were 2 educators. The second individual, Daniel Turner, became compliant between posting and today. So the information before you is only going to be taking action against the 1 educator, but that doesn't require a vote based upon a prior vote where you all agreed to do this on an information basis. But I did want to provide you that information.
Thank you. So we're not required to take a vote? No. Okay, thank you. You can move into the next agenda item, teacher licensure actions. And I believe we have one member of the board that wants to pull one item before we take the vote.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to pull item B, John Demerjen,
You're pulling
for
it-
discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any other items to be pulled? So we will be voting on all others except item B, which is being pulled for discussion. And this will require a roll call vote. Do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Cobbins, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Darnell. And I keep calling Mr. Griffin Mr. Casey, but it's Casey Griffin. So please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins? Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards? Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen? Ms. Kim? Mr. Morrow? Madam Chairman?
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Now we'll move to item B. Please, Mr. Eby.
So Mr. Demerjen allowed an 8th grade student to drive his personal vehicle out on the highway, and we're recommending a formal reprimand for that. I would like to move to change that to a 3-month suspension, but retroactive, because he is back teaching now. But I think it sends the message to others that, this is potentially a liable act for the school and just a stupid act. And so I think a formal reprimand I think it deserves more than that. So I would recommend that we change that to 3-month retroactive suspension.
I think there's a point for clarification. He didn't tell him to go drive on the highway, but he did allow him to drive the car in the parking lot or to move it. Obviously not thinking that the student would do that, but he didn't tell him to go drive. I just want to make that point for clarification. It was still
He
certainly,
told him to take it from point A to point B.
and he took it on the highway.
He took
Yeah.
it on the highway.
Right. So I just want us to clarify that.
A 13-year-old.
Right. Point for clarification there too, he was an 8th grader, but he was 15, and Lillian's correct. He did instruct the student to move the car, which was why we obviously thought action should be recommended, and then the student did take it on an
And
extra
the
ride.
student did not have a driver's license. Yes, thank you. Mr. Edwards?
So, this all being said, is there a law that says that an adult cannot enable a minor to do something like drive a car?
The Tennessee Code, the state law does provide that an adult cannot cause or knowingly permit a person under the age of 18 to drive on the highway when not authorized. But the question here would be, if I was a criminal attorney or I was representing Demerjen, I would ask whether or not he knowingly knew that the student was going to be driving on the highway, because even though he did, so there is a law out there that says that you're not supposed to do it knowingly or cause to. That's a misdemeanor offense. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, there is a law.
Okay, and not to get into tort, but if you were a liability attorney and that 15-year-old had been enabled by a authority figure to take a car of which the authority figure didn't have any control over what a minor was going to do with that car. I'm getting to where Mr. Eby said, if this thing had taken a really unfortunate, this would be a real big deal if there had been something that happened. And I don't see that we need to go more harsher than 3 months. I just wonder how much we spend in getting teachers to understand that if they just have a moment's lapse of judgment, it can really have a profound lifetime effect. And man, you're right, it was just board certified idiocy on what he did. I'm sure he's not an idiot. I mean, I've had those absences of thought. Boy, so I think there's laws involved, there's certainly liability involved, and I think school districts need to really spend time looking at what their personnel do's and don'ts, and you can't force, I would have never foreseen having to tell a teacher, don't go give a minor the keys to your car. I just would have never thought to put that in there.
You didn't provide the motion, did, the second, I mean.
Apparently I did, yeah, a second.
Okay, let's back up a second. You provided the motion.
No, I provided
I thought you did.
Yeah.
I thought you said opposite of that. I
No,
apologize.
asked if he got a second.
Okay. So Mr. Eby provides the motion and you provide the second.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? All in favor of changing the recommendation from a formal reprimand to 3 months? We do have to do a roll call.
Well, I was going to say that want to make sure everyone was clear that this motion is basically pulling this item
Okay.
and going back to let the educator know that after the board considered his case, they asked for a harsher recommendation, so that and from that point, I have to give him additional due process, opportunity to exercise his due process rights. So once the motion is voted on, that's what will happen.
Okay. So we'll take a roll call. Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion, the amended item is approved. Do we
Thank
have
you.
to vote again, Mr. Parliamentarian?
No,
We're
you
good. We're
should
good.
not.
Okay. We're about ready to move into adjournment. Before we do, I do want to, first of all, we state this almost every time that we have the licensure actions that we have to vote on, that it is one of the most troubling aspects of our work and what we have to vote on and deal with. And we're always mindful of the safety of the children, and taking this action is not something that we take lightly. So it always seems to come when we do the rewards and the distinguished schools. We certainly want to say the highlight of the day is recognizing you and all the great work that you're doing. So as soon as we adjourn, we will move into a reception and spend some more quality time with you and have a chance to talk a little bit. And I know you all will be eager to get on the road with the weather conditions that we've been experiencing overnight and today. I think the snow may have stopped. I'm not sure. I can't see outside. But nonetheless, the best part about this is recognizing reward schools and distinguished schools. I do want to ask if any of the board members have any closing comments that they would like to say before we adjourn.
I'd like to say just one thing. I did have the privilege of going to the Nashville Classical Charter School. I know we just talked about, and just I know it was important as we were going through confirmation hearings about going to places, hearing from people, and just want to say, going in the classrooms, students, talking to Mr. Friedman, they're doing a phenomenal job of educating kids in some of the most challenging situations and conditions. And so just for the public record, I would say, having been to the school, walked the hallways, walked in classrooms, seen teachers engaging with students, they're doing an absolutely phenomenal job.
Thank you for sharing those comments. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, I'd just like,
Yes, Mr.
I know
Ferguson.
we discussed this yesterday, but I think it just deserves a kind of exclamation point regarding our meeting with the TOS group.
Yes.
I again, I think we heard nothing but positive comments about the ability for us to interact in that kind of more informal environment. And I know that we're going to be doing some follow-up from some of the feedback we received, but I would hope that we could maybe do that again at their next annual meeting.
That would be our expectation, to do it again. Thank you. Any other? Mr. Eby?
And I do chair the subcommittee on graduation requirements, and we met this about a month ago, I guess. And I think we're continuing to make progress on that, and hopefully soon we'll be able to bring something forward. Right, Amy?
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for those comments. We will have our next State Board of Education meeting on May the 29th here in Nashville. I look forward to seeing you all then. We now stand, without objection, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Y'all please get some snacks. We've got a lot of food set up.